I think most importantly throughout this whole experience, you've just got to be kind to yourself. Like do not judge yourself against what your next door neighbour's doing. Do not judge yourself around what other people are doing. Everyone is experiencing this really differently.
Hello, one and all. Welcome back to Retrospective. It's the usual suspects, me and Chris. We're joined by another Chris today, so it's Chrisception. We're joined by Chris Marshall, who's a sports psychologist. How are you, man?
I'm good, thank you, pal. I'm good. How are you doing?
We're living the quarantine dream, man. Living the quarantine dream.
Wow,
whatever
trying
that means.
Trying to, anyway. Yeah. So Chris is actually my godfather, so this is even more Chrisception, which is crazy stuff. But yeah, so before we get into any sort of nitty-gritty, Chris, explain to the viewers who don't know who you are, like what you do and some of the projects you've worked on in the past.
Yeah, so as Chris mentioned, I'm Chris's godfather. Chris's dad is actually my godfather as well, so it's all a little bit family connected. So yeah, I'm a sports psychologist. I currently work for the FA, but prior to that, I've worked with numerous other organisations from the England and Wales Cricket Board and the English Institute of Sport. So I think we'll probably get into my career a little bit and how I got into it. But yeah, since 2007 was when I took my first job in sport. Was actually at Sheffield United Football Club. And then sort of as of 2008 was really when I started training properly as a psychologist, and that was at the EIS. So yeah, that's a bit of a whistle stop to where I've come from.
Yeah, and Hass, start us off, mate.
So what kind of made you want to step into that field? Was it a decision that you made quite early on? Was it something you sort of fell into? Yeah,
I think we'll get onto mental health. I think as we go through some of this discussion today. But when I was 18, going to university and about to start, I went to Sheffield Hallam. Had an absolutely sort of wonderful sort of first 6 months at university. I was actually far more interested in the physiology of sport and thinking strength and conditioning, fitness type coach is definitely the route I wanted to go down. But in that sort of January, February period of my first year, so that would be sort of 2004. One of the ways I was sort of supplementing my income a little bit at university was I was teaching swimming, and I was travelling back and from sort of Sheffield to Bridgnorth, which is where I was from, my hometown is, and I was doing my level 2 swimming instructors. And in that time, I really struggled to balance university sort of life, quite poorly, but trying to play cricket at university, and trying to do my training to be the sort of the next level of a swimming teacher. And I started to struggle with my own mental health in that period of time. And for about 6-7 months, I was really not in a particularly good way. Came back home that summer and definitely had a period where I was like, do I go back to university or not? Like I physically can't cope with, and mentally I can't cope with all these demands that are coming at me. I remember my old man dropping me off at Sheffield for my second year and sort of saying, look, give it another crack. But if it don't work out, feel free to come home. And that got me really interested in psychology because, I mean, Chris knows me. I've known Chris all his life, obviously. And I'm quite an extroverted human being, more than happy to sort of be the brunt of the jokes, but also sort of dish it out as well. And for that period of my life, it was definitely my mental health sort of let me down. And that got me really interested in psychology because I couldn't make any sense of it. And that's the sort of the turning point for me, really. So it was from my own sort of struggles in mental health for sort of 9 months, really, which has gone all my life. And there's definitely moments when my mood definitely drops, and I do have moments where I struggle, but not to the extent I did when I was 18. And that got me interested. And I suppose the rest is history in that sort of sense. And now I feel really lucky to do what I do.
Absolutely. So moving forward from there, what were your sort of initial steps into the psychology game from that point?
Well, it was, I suppose, when I realised in that sort of second and third year of university that maybe fitness coach and physiology and that sort of way wasn't the route I was going to go, I started making sure I took all the psychology modules basically at Hallam. And then at the end of my undergraduate degree, it becomes very clear that there are thousands upon thousands of sports science graduates every year. So if you want to get anywhere, you have to do a master's degree. So I went and did the master's degree at Sheffield Hallam in sport and exercise science, but the psychology component of it. And that was when I got this internship at Sheffield United Football Club. So the internship was in strength and conditioning, but when I sort of stepped into the role at Sheffield United, a guy called Kev Paxton, who's the head of sports science and medicine for the academy at Leicester City now. Paco was instrumental early in my career, recognised that psychology was a route I wanted to go, and helped me start to build a little bit of psychology into the academy at Sheffield United. So this would be in 2007. And that was with Ron Reed, Kevin Fogg, the coaches there at the time, Matt Morley, who I think is still at Sheffield United actually. And they were brilliant, really, really good for me because they gave me space to go and do. And that just sort of spurred my interest a little bit more, really. And then I got an internship at the English Institute of Sport. In 2008, there was an internship offered. 3 positions. I think there was over 100 people applied for those positions. So again, I felt really fortunate to get those roles. But yeah, I became a sports psychology intern in 2008 at the English Institute of Sport.
Yeah, and moving on from that, obviously, did you ever have? You obviously started at Sheffield United. Did you ever have any intention to? Do you want to stay in football? Did you want to go into different sports at the start of your career, or was it just purely focused on the one sport?
I'm just fascinated in people and helping people perform at their best. So, cricket is the sport that I played growing up. Cricket would still be my first love, really, second to Aston Villa. So hoping the Premier League does restart purely so we can make sure we don't get relegated. Obviously, health and well-being is most important first. But from my point of view, I've worked in numerous sports, and first and foremost, you have to understand the demands of the sport. Understand the sport in general. People do those sports because they love those sports. So you have to get a real in-depth understanding of that. Well, fundamentally, my role isn't about helping people achieve their goals, whether that be coaches or athletes. And that's what I love most about my role, is the ability to support people on their journey. Now, I love football as well. So football and cricket are absolutely the 2 sports I enjoy the most. And I love the role that I do now at the FA, very different to roles that I've done historically. But yeah, I'm not overly precious of what sport I work in. It's just about supporting people, really, and supporting people towards their goals.
Are there any sort of changes you have to make in your strategy when you deal with people from different sports, for example, boxing to football? Yes, there are. I think one thing I alluded to there is understanding what the psychological demands of the sport are. Psychological demands of boxing are very different to the psychological demands of football. The higher you go up the chain when you get to the top level, appreciate there's elements of expectation, the pressure that comes from external factors, but the demands of the game specifically are different. So you have to understand that. But then, not just sporting wise, Chris, I suppose it's people wise. Every human being is different. So whilst I have some principles which I believe to be really important when it comes to developing athletes, every athlete that you work with is a different human being. They bring with them different cultural backgrounds, different experiences, different knowledge, different personality types. So finding a way to connect with different human beings is the most important bit about my role.
Obviously, you mentioned the different sports and the different levels of it and stuff, and you've seen quite a lot, obviously, from the FA through to boxing with the Olympics and stuff. Obviously, the Olympics in boxing considered quite prestigious, more so than other sports. Like Olympic football, for example, is not really looked at in the same sort of high regard. So obviously, the pressure on boxing Olympians per se is quite substantially high. What's that process like? Because those guys are still quite young in that period of time as well.
Yeah.
So how do you connect with someone that's obviously still quite youthful in the mindset?
Yeah, when I was at GB Boxing, I was quite young. Look, I'm still quite young now. I'm only 34, so I'm hoping I've still got a long career ahead of me. You have to understand the needs of the athlete group that you're working with. So if we think about when I was at GB Boxing, I would have been, let me try and do my maths here. I'd have been, left GB Boxing in 2015. So I'd have been here 27, 28, 29. So I was quite close to the age group of some of the athletes, and actually of a similar age to a couple of athletes in that program at the time, Nicola Adams, Amanda Coulson, who were of similar age to me. And that brings another challenge. So as a psychologist, you're working with someone that's the same age as you, so you have to build a relationship in a different way that you do from a younger athlete. But also, what do we know? So Generation Z, which is typically that type of athletes that come from that age group, we know that winning is important to any athlete. But what we also know from Generation Z, that the athletes that are born in the sort of the late 90s, early 2000s, sense of purpose, sense of identity, sense of stuff bigger than themselves is also really important to them. So if we just hammer about winning and winning and winning and winning all the time, one, it's an outcome type goal which elevates pressure. But secondly, it doesn't help to ground them in what's really important to them, which is helping the community, developing a sense of who they are, doing something that's bigger than them. That's a generalization to some extent, but we know that is more and more prevalent in athletes that are from the generation sort of Z era, whereas I'm classed as a millennial in that sense, and my perspective on life is a bit different. So you just have to find a way to connect, and how I connect with a 20-year-old footballer compared to a 20-year-old cricketer is also different. You just have to find that way.
Obviously now we've got, the age of social media and stuff, and that's obviously, I'd imagine, a massive factor with the fact that, people feel like reputation is now more important than ever. How is your sort of understanding of that, element of it had to change over time? Because obviously as that evolves, I guess you have to evolve too.
So hard, isn't it? So hard, the world of social media for athletes at times. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there's some huge benefits to it. I mean, the type of revenue and exposure that young athletes can now get, social media is absolutely a key part of that. But it can bring with it a huge amount of expectation. And I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but it's very different to each person. So I can think of some athletes that I've worked with that will absolutely switch off from social media in those final few days before going into competition, because that enables them to then really bring their focus down into actually what they need to do, what are their key processes in order for them to be successful. We also know some athletes that will continue to engage in social media, and that has less of an impact on their performance than others. But really managing your time, and do you know what actually is a really helpful tool for me as an athlete, as a psychologist, is being able to recognize the amount of screen time at times athletes can spend on their phone. And some of my athletes I work with are happy to say, yeah, Marshy, do you know what? I'm doing 7-8 hours a day at the moment. I need to find a way of managing that. And some are it's more sort of you 2-3 hours a day. And again, just recognizing what your key triggers are is the most helpful strategy in all this. But yeah, it has its pros and its cons, social media, and understanding your relationship with social media is really important.
And obviously, now people will be having a lot more screen time at the moment because they're not able to compete really in the situation. How has COVID-19 affected your role in that?
Well, I'm pretty good with technology. I'm naturally quite good at it. I grew up. Again, I talked about being a millennial. I grew up in that technology change, really. I mean, I still remember dial-up broadband. Remember my mom shouting down the stairs, "Get off the internet! I want to phone your nan." That type of thing, because that world was a little bit different then. How has it changed for me? I mean, everything we do now is virtual, isn't it? So the communication I have with my coaches, I don't do any direct athlete work with the footballers at the FA, because we only work with athletes when they come on camp with us. But all my work with the coaching staff and etc. is done via Microsoft Teams or FaceTime or whatever it is we use. Trying to make sure that any of the athletes that I worked with outside of football are still making sure they get out and they do their hour of exercise that they're allowed to do, get that fresh air. That's really important. But connecting with people virtually is so crucial. So I know we get the odd virtual quiz on the go. You connect with your friends, you connect with your family virtually. I think that's been the biggest change for me, really, is working out how to deliver my role and provide support to the people that I work with virtually, rather than in that face-to-face capacity. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and you mentioned when you were talking to Hasan, I just made a quick note of it, that you had to maybe sort of change when you're talking to someone of the same age as you or a little bit younger. Do you think your characteristics as a psychologist affect directly your client in that respect?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can think of incidences where I've not connected with an athlete or a coach, and that's cool. Like, they might find someone else to work with, or it might not quite work for me. You're never, as a psychologist, you're never ever going to be able to work with everybody. There will always be some people that just go, yeah, I'm not quite sure I can connect with you, because I suppose the best way to describe it is, as a physiotherapist, they will bring their bed with them, and they'll bring their tape, and they'll bring their knowledge of that. A strength and conditioning coach will bring weights. A doctor will bring medication. As a psychologist, you bring you. Like, you bring you as an individual, and my ability to show empathy or not to show empathy. My ability, which is when I get it wrong, my ability to bring the skills that I might have to support that athlete. My ability to listen. And sometimes it just doesn't connect, and that can be hard. It can be hard, but it's something that you have to manage as a practitioner. Is how you find a way to connect with people. And I think one of the the best bits of advice I was ever given is, when I was at the EIS, I had two mentors, Mark Borden and Pete Lindsay, who have gone on to do wonderful things in their careers. Is the metaphor of like working through the red arrows, and the red arrows we called like the head coach or your PD. And to have a positive impact on someone's psychology, you don't always have to be directly working with them. So my relationship with Rob McCracken at GB Boxing and the coaches, Dave Alloway, Lee Pullen, Paul Wormsley, etc., all those coaches there, that was really important, because we can still have positive impact on the athlete just by not directly working with that athlete. And that's where the role of psychologists around helping to inform and shape the culture and the environment is really, really important. So my role can be athlete facing at times, but it can also be, and most of the time, if I'm honest, is working with the coaching staff and support staff and helping us shape our environments. And there are times where we get that absolutely bang on, and there are times where we have to try and think about how we can do it better.
Yeah, I mean, the question I got is a bit more of a hypothetical one, really. So, a podcast we were on where we did the collaboration with Average Pundits, which guys should go and check out, of course. Cheeky plug. So we were discussing, the ending of the football season, and how it should either be resumed or if it will end. And one of the things we discussed was Sheffield United, of course, the season that they've had. And we were discussing, if they were to end it now, and Sheffield weren't to be able to, push up the tail, which is perfectly a feasible thing, how that would maybe affect them mentally the following season when they do resume football. How would, from a psychologist's, point of view, how do you think it would affect the morale of staff and players if they were to cancel the season now and it sort of blocked them even getting that chance of going for Europe and stuff like that?
Yeah, Haas, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I really have a clear answer. Like, I think first and foremost, the health and well-being of the nation is the most important thing. The worst thing that happens here is that football gets brought back, and
you get a wave of sick people and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that would be terrible. Of course, we want to see that happen. We want to see football played. I don't really know how to answer that question. So I think it's all quite individual. There are decisions far above my pay grade, and I'm sure they'll come to a decision which is safe and when ready to do so. And I truly hope that the Bundesliga goes off and without any hiccups and it happens. I think each person will deal with this differently. And when football comes back, let's hope we do it safely and it's done in a way which means everyone can enjoy it again.
Yeah, definitely. Because the last thing that anybody wants is, a wave of players to get sick because they brought it back too early, or the right measurements weren't in place. But it's quite interesting to think how footballers will react when it does, when it does come back inevitably. Whether they're able to pick themselves up in the same sense of not having fans in the stadium and stuff like that, and that sort of looming sense of, well, I'm still at risk in that scenario. What's sort of the average kind of mentality being of players in this scenario, if you're able to disclose anything, that is?
Well, I think rather than talking quite specifically, I think there are a couple of different mentalities that people take in general, not just football. I think anyone takes in this scenario. It's how one thing that for me has been really, really important is how do I want my little boy to remember me through this experience? My little boy's 3 years old. But I've seen so much more of Teddy now than I would have seen in this period of time. So it's really, really great to spend this quality time with Teddy. So I'm trying to make sure I spend as much time with him, and he has no idea what's going on. Well, he has absolutely no idea what's going on. But what he will remember is how I was and how Jo was, my wife, through this experience. I see that some people are seeing this as a real opportunity to learn something new. Actually, I've got a little bit more time on my hands here. I may have been furloughed, I may not have been furloughed, but I'm gonna learn something through this experience. But then I can also hear examples of people that have got 3 kids that are really battling to get through their work, managing their kids, homeschooling. And I think most importantly throughout this whole experience, you've just got to be kind to yourself. Like do not judge yourself against what your next door neighbour's doing. Do not judge yourself around what other people are doing. Everyone is experiencing this really differently. The only person you have to hold yourself account to is you. And as soon as you start to compare yourself to, oh, look at the amount of work they're doing over there, or wow, they're flying through this, I'm really struggling. That's where the mental health issue will start to escalate, I think, is when we start to draw comparisons about how other people are managing this experience. I've definitely had days where I thought I've had a really good day today. And I've definitely had days where I've gone, yeah, that was tough today. That was really difficult. I'm quite a sociable human being. I like contact with other people, and I've missed that. Definitely missed that. But yeah, if you judge yourself against what other people are doing, you'll find yourself in a really difficult place at times. Like what's productive for you might not be for other people, and that's okay.
Yeah. What I wanted to get onto more on the cricketing side of things. So I watched a documentary, I think, a couple of weeks ago called The Edge, where it was talking about Andy Flower's era as England coach, and in that where they went from number 7 to number 1 so quickly, and how they almost disregarded sports psychology in the fact that at the end it was just all obviously the whole issues with Jonathan Trott and stuff like that. Have you seen in your time in the industry a rise in significance of sports psychology?
Yeah, it's definitely growing. Look, The Edge is a really, really good documentary. But Mark Borden was a psychologist through that period of time there and did a fantastic job. So Mark wasn't, I wouldn't say he was disregarded in that sense. I think Mark did a really, really good job with that team and with Andy particularly through that period. There are definitely more sports psychology jobs out there than there used to be, and it's great that the discipline is becoming more and more valued. And I think I'm part of that. I feel fortunate to be in the roles that I do, and it's great that more and more sports now are embracing the ability to use a psychologist, an applied psychologist, to support their athletes, to support their coaches, and also fundamentally there to support performance really. So yeah, the discipline is definitely growing, and I think that's really helping.
Absolutely. And one thing I also wanted to ask is, like, how do you find the balance between pushing for success and victory and maintaining sort of well-being?
Yeah, I mean, they come hand in hand really. I mean, when you work with like the top athletes have got a real drive about them. Like they really want to win and be successful. And often, like I've sort of alluded to here, want to leave a bit of a legacy and have a positive impact on their family and people around them. It's for me, the answer is just managing and helping to support people all the way through that journey. So there are definitely going to be times where people's mood drops, and this is where there's that sort of that stigma around like mental health or mental illness. Like we all have mental health. Like every single one of us has mental health. Some days it's great. Some days our mood is a little bit lower. It doesn't necessarily mean we've got a mental illness in that sense. And that's not to trivialize people that do have severe mental illnesses and absolutely need the right amount of support. But the fact that we are now more and more willing to talk about our mental health, and whether we're having like really good days or actually we're finding this period of time difficult, that for me, that's a really good place for us to be. But I'm going to sound like a broken record, fellas, and I apologise for that. But it goes back to each individual that you work with. Like each individual has a capacity that they really want to push themselves to, and the best athletes in the world know where their levels are, and they will keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And you just have to be mindful of their mental health as you go through that.
On the flip side to obviously championship winners and stuff like that, what's it like on, you know, the opposite end of the scale when something does go wrong, you know, when someone encounters a loss or a defeat? What separates, you know, your normal athlete from the truly elite in that sense, in bouncing back from adversity?
Yeah, consistency is really quite important. You should never get too high when you win and never get too low when you lose. Like try and keep that bandwidth quite consistent, really. So I think that the best examples are the athletes that recognise that winning is part of their journey. It's part of the steps that they're going to take. And winning after winning is difficult. So that going again for that second or third time. So that's where like sort of multiple Olympic champions are really, really fascinating human beings to go again and to go again and to go again. That real drive, that conscientiousness that they have to want to be really successful is what will help them stand out from being the best, really. Help them stand out from the best. If we think about not taking the losses too hard, like that for me is quite important, because in cricket, for example, you fail more than you succeed. A batsman will have runs of low scores before they go through their runs of high scores. So you will fail more often than you will really have success. Can't remember exactly what the stats are, but if you've got a conversion rate of 1 in 10 to 100, like you're doing pretty well as a batter. So you can't afford to let the lows impact you too much, because if you do, it'll be a really, really difficult career if you do. So keeping that bandwidth quite consistent and not getting on that roller coaster is really important.
I mean, there's two examples of, you know, those two varying mentalities you mentioned. Obviously, you had Joshua Post-Ruiz with his sort of grounded approach, stay quite, you know, quite humble about it. And then you obviously had Wilder's recent one with Fury, where he's dropped 1,000,001 excuses and all that sort of thing. With Wilder's more so than Joshua's, why did you think that he shot out so many different sort of varying excuses in completely different spectrums in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell you without knowing him. But every athlete deals with defeat. Look, what we know is that typically when athletes, whoever it may be, tend to use excuses for poor performances, it will protect their confidence in the short term. The question for me then becomes, well, are they doing the things they need to rectify what maybe went wrong?
It's like a vulnerability thing, essentially.
To some extent, but if you, what we know about excuse making is that it can have a short-term impact to maintain confidence. So you can use it as a way of sort of disassociating yourself from what happened and just sort of go, yeah, look, I'm fine, it's okay, because of this, because of this, because of this. But if you're not willing to really effectively debrief your performance, so like really go back over it, okay, come on, like what went well, what didn't go quite so well here, like What do I need to tweak? What happened in my training camp beforehand? Did I prepare well enough? Did I get the sparring partners right, etc., etc.? There's so much stuff to do. You have to be willing to really go to a nice level of detail to then go, okay, this is what I now need to tweak moving forward. But you should be doing that whether you win or whether you lose. Like the idea of having a really effective debrief in performance is crucial, and you shouldn't just wait until you've lost to effectively debrief your performances. You should be debriefing your performances when you win as well, because you also want to know, like, what's working. Actually, what is working? Let's be really explicit in what's working, and we can use our previous performance experiences again as a real nice source of confidence. So yeah, that for me would be the bit, is just effectively debrief whether you win, lose, or draw.
Absolutely. So for yourself, obviously you're still young. You've got loads and loads of time left in your career. Is there anything that you look at and you think, I really, really want to get into that? Or is there any goals that you want to achieve for yourself?
It's a great question. Look, I love what I do. I feel really fortunate to do what I do. One of the great things about my job is you do get to travel the world. And when I was with England cricket, spending time in New Zealand, Australia, West Indies, Sri Lanka, India, are all experiences that I've absolutely loved and cherished, and I'd love to continue that for the next few years. There will probably become a point in my career where I can't keep doing that level of travel. It is hard on the family, like the amount of time you are away with your sports. It is hard. So there will definitely be a point where that travel will probably have to reduce a little bit. When that point is at the moment, I'm not really that sure. I love the fact that I get to support England football at the moment, and I hope that continues for a period of time. And I suppose that's where my goals are at the moment, is to do a really great job within the organisation that I'm in. And that's probably where I'm at actually at this moment in time. And it's definitely a fair bit of thinking I've got to do about what I think my career can look like next. But at this moment in time, I want to, hopefully when this lockdown ends and we can get back to international football again, helping some of the young footballers achieve their goals.
And for yourself, how do you ever? And obviously you are a professional, but are there some times where you just think, crikey, you've grown up watching cricket, you're watching football, and you just get to sit there and watch it and work in it, and actually a little bit of a fanboy comes out in there? Because I would certainly be like that.
Yeah, look, it's I think one thing you have to remember is that when you work with athletes, they're still human beings at the end of the day. They've got their foibles, they've got their strengths, they've got their weaknesses, they're a normal human being, just like everybody else. And they're just dealing with different things. They're just dealing with different stuff to manage. But yeah, don't get me wrong. It's when I've got plenty of photos when I put the England football kit on, or put the England cricket stuff on, or even when I put like my the GB boxing kit on. You go, I feel they're proud here to be able to support some of the best athletes in those sports. So yeah, there's definitely moments where I was sat on a balcony. I suppose we'll say one story. When I was with England cricket, and we went to Sri Lanka. My first tour with the England senior team, I remember being sat in the Premadasa Stadium in Colombo, sat on the balcony, and the lads had just gone out to play a one-day international. And oh my word, the noise in that stadium. I never went to Eden Gardens in India. It's a tour I never did. I can't imagine what the noise was like there. But I remember being sat on the balcony at the Premadasa thinking, wow, this is impressive. And for sort of 10-15 minutes being sat there, like looking around, like in complete awe of the venue, the situation, like the whole stadium itself. And I remember thinking, wow, this is special. That was my first tour with the senior team at that period of time. Yeah, definitely had huge butterflies at that period, that's for sure.
One thing I was going to ask is, obviously, you got the whole statement of people who bring work home with them. So what's it like the process of taking off the psychologist hat and coming back and being Chris Marshall, the family man?
Yeah.
Do you find it's hard sometimes to turn it off?
Yeah, I don't always get it right. I suppose the best sort of story to share here is I think as any coach or any professional that works in sport, one of the most important skills I believe that you need is empathy. So that real ability to stand in somebody else's shoes and to support them from their perspective. And empathy is absolutely a skill which you have to learn, and some people have it a bit more naturally than others, and I definitely don't have it naturally. I've definitely had to learn to be more empathic in the way in which I work, and that's, as a psychologist, that's helped me hugely. What that means is that when I spend a lot of time in the day listening, when I come home, I'm sometimes a bit mentally fatigued myself. I'm sometimes a little bit like, oof, wow, I'm a bit tired today, and I definitely don't listen at home as much as I'd like to. And being able to switch off from work can be difficult. Sport is a 24/7 job. And I suppose the way that I try and do it, which doesn't always work, but we do my best, is to make sure I don't have my phone with me in every single room. Is that when I'm with Teddy or I'm with Joe, like, I try and really focus my energy on, well, what are we doing, and what do we want to try and what are we doing today, and what do I want to experience with Teddy, with my wife. So trying to switch off from those periods of time. I actually took one bit of advice from a colleague that I worked with when I was at GB Boxing. He worked for a company that was doing a project for us, and he basically said, don't call me between 5 and 7. Between 5 and 7 is my family time. If you phone me after 7, I might answer. Before 5, but between 5 and 7, don't even bother trying to call me if you need some help with something. And I'm not great at that, but there are definitely times when I sort of in my mind go, right, I'm blocking this time off now, and I'm not going to answer my phone. So that's the challenge. But yeah, empathy for me is a skill that everyone needs. Is absolutely developable. But for me, it can be quite tiring at times, so I have to try and manage that.
Yeah, and obviously, in your personal life, when you're sort of maybe debating or disputing with you, would you find you sort of sometimes slip into psychologist mode, and you almost pick apart your relatives and friends as opposed to?
Yeah, not as much as I think I do. I can switch off from my job, that is for sure. But I suppose more like when Jo comes home from work and she's got a bit of an issue, I might try and help her through with that. Or I know friends in the past have had a few issues that they felt safe enough to come to me and say, look, Chris, I'm finding this a bit difficult at the moment. And I sort of then have to sort of drop on the psychologist hat and go, okay, I suppose more than anything, like, step into a method. So, okay, right, I'm going to just sort of ask a few questions and then try and help you understand your perspective. And then I'd never do the work, but I'd then say, well, I've got an idea about maybe someone that we can point in a direction with that might help. But I mean, I can think for some of the coaches that I worked with, particularly, you become quite close with. I think that when I worked with cricket, particularly, you're away for such a long period of time. You learn so much about each other. Coaches have definitely been psychologists to me at times when I've been on tour, and I've found elements of it difficult, missing family and missing friends and stuff. So I can think of numerous coaches that I work with that I'd now class as friends, and then getting that balance right between, okay, right, hat on, we're now going to be doing some work, and then hat on, right, we're now friends, maybe having a social beer. Getting that right is important, and that takes a huge amount of trust both ways, really.
Absolutely. Last one from me. We always ask this question, and it always brings up some good answers. If you could advise yourself before you were just getting into the industry, anything now, what would you say? I
suppose this is sort of pointed at young performance psychologists, really. That if I'm thinking if I'm going back, it's for me, it's expose yourself to as many environments as possible. I talk about my career. I felt a bit lucky at the beginning, sort of right place, right time type stuff. Then when I reflect back on it, I think there is an element of me that thinks you do make your own luck. I worked really, really hard in that 2006 to 2008 period. I worked really hard on a few different internships, really, just getting myself out there, learning, listening. And I think that was definitely it. Like I mentioned at the beginning, like Kev Paxton, but all the staff at Sheffield United at that period of time, Dean Riddle, when he came in, like years upon years, hours upon hours of experience of working in elite sport. Like listen and lap it up, because if you don't do that, then you'll get a little bit stuck in your own way and your own thinking. So when I went from Sheffield United to the EIS, it was listen, take it in, learn about the different environments. First sport I worked in was table tennis. We had a wonderful coach called Jai, Chinese fella, who had some really, really clear views on how the game should be played. For me, it contradicted some of the stuff that I felt about skill acquisition. But who am I? This is Jai. Jai is a wonderful table tennis coach, some wonderful principles. I learned a huge amount from Jai. When you stop learning off other people, that's when you got to worry a bit, I think.
My final one is, so far in your career, what's your absolute best moment? Whether it's seeing a set of athletes achieve something or a particular story that you really enjoy.
Yeah, there's a couple actually. One is being involved with an athlete that had, I won't share who it was. One involved an athlete who had quite severe mental health issues for a period of time, and working with them alongside a clinical psychologist, someone that may have left the game and found themselves back in the game again and doing well. Like they're really reassuring. Like they're really great moments for me. When you see somebody who was in such a dark place for a period of time, the work that was needed to do was sort of outside of my skill set. So I worked closely with a clinical psychologist and we did some work together to see that athlete come through the other side and then get back into the game again. That fulfilled me hugely, that sort of stuff. I'm smiling because in London 2012 in the Paralympic Games, the women's class 3 disability table tennis team won bronze, and oh my word, like the amount of effort and work we put in with that team, the amount of relief those I'll never forget those women to the day I die. They were absolutely wonderful human beings to work with, challenging at times, and we'll laugh and joke about it now. But they won bronze in London 2012, and they took every game to the 5th set. You're like, oh my word, can you just win a game easy, please? Like the nerves and anxiety we were having watching them play. And then when they won bronze, I won't lie, I burst into tears because I was like, thank God you have won something. Because the amount of effort they put in to achieve that medal, like that is a memory that will sit with me. Like it will sit with me for the rest of my life. The class 3 women winning bronze in London 2012 in the Paralympic Games table tennis, like that will sit with me. That will sit with me forever, ever and a day. So yeah, I know that. And then I suppose my final one would be 2014. Went to the Under-19 Cricket World Cup in Dubai, and lost in the semi-final to Pakistan. But that group of athletes that we worked with and that group of coaching staff, we were really tight all the way through that. I never forget, we did Tim Boone was the head coach at the time, and I just really started in cricket in that period. And Tim had asked me to do a session with the group, and I'd pinched basically an activity which we sort of called the pit stop challenge, where you had to put lots of lengths of cardboard together to make a shape. A bit of a team build activity, a bit of a cheesy sort of type team build activity. It went like a car crash. Like it must have been like one of the first group sessions I'd done with this team. It was in, I can't remember what month it would have been in. It'd probably been in November time, and it was a car crash. like an absolute car crash. And I'm going through my head, I'm thinking, what's the head coach going to think of me now? The players aren't going to want to work with me. Oh my God, like what has happened here? And Tim came to me and went, Marsh, that was brilliant. I was like, that was the opposite of brilliant. Whatever the opposite of brilliance is, that is that. He went, what we saw there is what this group are like under pressure. We've got a bit of work to do. And I sat there and I thought, I'd not even thought about that. Like I was so frustrated that the session hadn't gone the way I thought it was going to go. And about 2 or 3 days later, we're still on camp. Some of the players came up to me and said, "Oh mate, we're sorry." I was like, this is like 18-year-olds. Like, what are you sorry about? He went, "Oh, we didn't act particularly well there. Like, we get it now. Actually, we get it. We get that the way we were with each other in that session. If we're like that on the pitch, we ain't gonna be able to perform." And I remember sitting there thinking, like, wow, they've got these lads have got more insight than me in this period of time. And then that was like a pivotal session to some extent, which came from a complete car crash. And we as a group of staff and as players were really tight through that period. So yeah, three sort of stories really. But I could keep going. I mean, I feel really privileged to do the job that I do, and you get to be there when athletes are at the top, but you also get to be there when athletes are finding it really difficult, and being there when they're at the top, but being there when they're at the bottom, like they both have their different elements of reward to them if you can support them through either of that. So yeah, it's a privilege to do what I do, and I'm thankful for it every day.
I think that's a very good place to finish, don't you, Mr. Hasan Karim?
Yeah, no, definitely, absolutely brilliant.
That was really insightful, and obviously the reason why we do this is to learn sort of stuff from different perspectives. And me and Hass have obviously learned a load there, so it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming on.
No, that's okay, mate.
And yeah, Hass, anything you want to say, mate, before we head off?
Again, big up for all the sort of support we've had on this series so far, particularly with Derek Ray's recent episode. Crazy support. Yeah, that was incredible. Hopefully that continues. Hopefully you guys continue to enjoy it. Any suggestions, feel free to drop them in the comments. But yeah, that's another one for Retrospective for now. I'm sure we'll see you again in the near future.
See you next time.